Sarah Chen had an MFA from NYU's Tisch School. She'd studied Stanislavski under Stella Adler's protégés. She knew method acting. So when the older guy auditing her UCLA class offered a correction about emotional memory versus emotional recall, Sarah's response was instinctive. I understand the distinction, but my training was very specific about this. The older man in the baseball cap nodded and said nothing more. Professor Morrison looked uncomfortable. Then, very quietly, she said, Sarah, our observer today is Robin Williams. Perhaps we should hear his perspective on how these techniques work in practice. The color drained from Sarah's face. She'd just dismissed a note from someone who'd studied at Juilliard and had been working professionally since before she was born. It was October 2010, and UCLA's graduate acting program was in the middle of a scene study session. 12 MFA students, all in their mid to late 20s, all serious about their craft, all carrying the confidence that comes from having been accepted into a competitive program. Professor Linda Morrison had mentioned that morning that they'd have a special observer in class. Alumni were occasionally allowed to audit sessions, so nobody thought much of it. When the older man arrived, baseball cap, reading glasses, carrying a worn notebook. He looked like any other former student returning to watch the next generation work. He took a seat in the back corner, opened his notebook, and sat quietly. Nobody recognized him. The session focused on Stanislavski's technique, specifically the concept of emotional memory, using personal experiences to access authentic emotion in performance. Sarah Chen was up first. She'd chosen a scene from A Streetcar Named Desire, Blanche's breakdown monologue. Sarah was 26, had graduated from NYU 2 years earlier, and had been working in small theater productions around Los Angeles while pursuing her MFA at UCLA. She was talented. Everyone in the program knew it. Her technique was solid, her emotional access was real, and she took her craft seriously. Sarah performed the scene with full commitment. She accessed real emotion, her voice broke at the right moments, her body language conveyed Blanche's fragility. When she finished, the room was quiet in that way that indicates respect. Professor Morrison nodded. Strong work, Sarah. Let's talk about your process. Walk us through how you prepared emotionally for this scene. Sarah explained her preparation. I used emotional memory. Blanche is experiencing the loss of everything she valued, her home, her reputation, her sense of self. I accessed memories of my own losses to connect with that feeling. The key is to relive those moments fully, to bring yourself back to that emotional state so the performance is authentic. A few students nodded. This was standard method technique, exactly what they'd been studying. That's when the voice came from the back corner. Quiet, but clear enough for everyone to hear. You're conflating emotional memory with emotional recall. Sarah turned. The older man in the baseball cap was looking up from his notebook. I'm sorry, Sarah said. Emotional memory and emotional recall, he repeated gently. They're different techniques. What you're describing, reliving the loss fully, bringing yourself back to that state, that's emotional memory. But it's not what Stanislavski ultimately recommended for regular use. Sarah felt a flash of irritation. She'd studied this extensively. With all due respect, Stanislavski's method is about accessing real emotion, which is what I'm doing. Emotional memory is the foundation of method acting. The older man nodded. I understand. It's a common interpretation. I've just found that conflating the two creates problems. Professor Morrison shifted in her seat, looking uncomfortable. A few students glanced between Sarah and the observer. Sarah pressed forward, confident in her training. I studied under professors who worked directly with Stella Adler. The technique is well established. You draw on real personal experience to fuel the performance. The older man said nothing more. He just nodded and looked back down at his notebook. The room went quiet. Professor Morrison cleared her throat. Sarah, she said very quietly, I should have made a proper introduction earlier. Our observer today is Robin Williams. He's graciously agreed to sit in on our session. Perhaps we should hear his perspective on how these techniques work in practice. The color drained from Sarah's face. Robin Williams. The Robin Williams. Juilliard graduate. Studied under John Houseman. 35 years of professional work in comedy, drama, improvisation. Dead Poets Society. Good Will Hunting. The Fisher King. She'd just explained method acting to Robin Williams. The room was completely silent. Every student was frozen. Sarah felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her. Robin looked up with a small, kind smile. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disrupt. Professor Morrison and I discussed my observing quietly, but I couldn't help offering a note when I heard something that might be helpful. Professor Morrison gestured to him. Robin, would you be willing to elaborate on the distinction? I think it would be valuable for everyone to hear. Robin stood and walked to the front of the room. Not to take over, just to be better heard. First, he said, looking directly at Sarah, your performance was excellent. Really excellent. The emotion was genuine, the technique was solid. What I'm offering isn't criticism of what you did, it's a clarification about the technique itself. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Robin continued. Stanislavski developed emotional memory early in his career. The idea was exactly what Sarah described: access real personal experiences, relive them, use that emotional state to fuel the performance. It works. It's powerful. But Stanislavski himself moved away from recommending it as a primary technique. He paused, making sure everyone was following. The problem is that reliving trauma, really reliving it, bringing yourself fully back into a painful experience, takes a psychological toll. If you're doing 8 shows a week, accessing real grief or real terror every single performance, you're re-traumatizing yourself repeatedly. Stanislavski recognized this was unsustainable and potentially harmful. A few students leaned forward. This wasn't what they'd been taught. So he developed emotional recall as an alternative. Instead of reliving the experience, you recall the physical sensations associated with the emotion. The tightness in your chest, the heaviness in your limbs, the way your breath changes. You access the emotional truth through the body's memory, not by re-experiencing the psychological trauma. Robin looked at Sarah. What you did in your performance worked because you're talented and committed. But if you do this professionally, 8 shows a week, or 15-hour film days, you need a technique that doesn't require you to break your own heart every single time. Sarah absorbed this. It made sense? Complete sense. And she'd dismissed it because she thought she knew better. I learned this the hard way, Robin said. When I was at Juilliard, John Houseman, who'd worked with people who knew Stanislavski personally, taught us this distinction. But I didn't really understand it until I was doing my first long theater run and found myself emotionally destroyed after 2 weeks. A director pulled me aside and explained what you're doing. Accessing the trauma itself, versus what you should be doing. Accessing the physical memory of how that emotion lives in your body. He smiled at the class. I still got it wrong for years. I'd access real pain for dramatic scenes, and it would take me hours to shake it off afterward. Eventually I learned to trust the physical recall. Your body remembers how emotion feels. You don't have to re-traumatize yourself to access that truth. Professor Morrison nodded. This is the distinction I've been trying to articulate all semester. Sarah, your technique is sophisticated, but Robin's right, it's not sustainable for a professional career. Sarah found her voice. I'm so sorry. I should have listened instead of explaining back to you. Robin shook his head. No, don't apologize. You were taught a specific interpretation by people you trust. That's not wrong. And honestly, the fact that you were confident enough in your training to defend it, that's good. That means you've internalized the work. He sat on the edge of a desk, more relaxed now. Can I show you something? Do you mind if we run your scene again, but this time we'll try it with emotional recall instead of emotional memory? Sarah nodded. Okay, think about a time you experienced real loss. Don't tell me what it was, keep it private. But remember how it felt physically. Not the story, not the circumstances. Just the physical sensations. Where did you feel it in your body? Sarah closed her eyes. My chest. Like something was pressing down on it. And my throat felt tight. Good. Now, still with your eyes closed, can you recreate those physical sensations? Tighten your throat, feel that pressure on your chest. Sarah did. And immediately, emotion welled up. Not because she was reliving the loss, but because her body remembered how loss feels. Now open your eyes and start the scene. Don't think about the memory. Just maintain those physical sensations. Sarah began Blanche's monologue. The emotion was there, just as real, just as authentic, but somehow it felt different. Less like she was drowning in it, more like she was channeling it. When she finished, Robin nodded. You see the difference? Same emotional truth, but you're not re-traumatizing yourself. You're accessing the feeling through physical memory. That's sustainable for a long career. The room was completely silent. Every student was absorbing this. Professor Morrison spoke. This is what I've been trying to teach all semester, but hearing it from someone who's lived it professionally for 35 years makes it real in a different way. Robin turned to the class. Here's the thing about technique, it's not about rules. It's about finding what works for you over the long term. What Sarah was doing is a legitimate interpretation of method acting. But if you're serious about a professional career, you need tools that won't destroy you. He looked at Sarah. You're talented enough to work for decades. I'm just giving you a tool that will let you do that without burning out in your 20s. A student raised her hand. Did you study method acting at Juilliard? We studied everything. Stanislavski, Meisner, Strasberg's interpretation, Adler's interpretation. Haussmann made us understand that these are tools, not religions. You use what works for the role, for the medium, for your own psychological health. Another student, how do you choose which technique for which role? Robin smiled. That's the work. That's what you spend your career figuring out. Comedy often needs something lighter. You're not accessing trauma, you're accessing joy or absurdity or irritation. Drama can need deeper work, but you still have to protect yourself. Film is different from theater because you're not doing it 8 times a week. It's all contextual. He stood up. I should let you get back to your session. I didn't mean to take over. Professor Morrison shook her head. This has been invaluable. Thank you. Robin picked up his notebook, gave a small wave and headed for the door. But before he left, he stopped and turned back to Sarah. Keep defending your training. Keep being confident in what you know. That's not the problem. Just stay open to refinement. You're going to have a long career if you want it. Make sure your technique supports that. Sarah managed to say, thank you. Robin nodded and left. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then Professor Morrison said, well, I think we just got a masterclass. Sarah sat down, her mind racing. She'd dismissed a technical note from Robin Williams because she was confident in her NYU training. And instead of making her feel stupid, he'd taught her something that would change how she approached her craft. After class, several students approached Sarah. Nobody mocked her. Instead, they were processing what they'd all just learned. I've been doing the same thing, one classmate said. Using real trauma for every emotional scene. I thought that's what method acting meant. Another student. My therapist asked me last month why I was so depressed after rehearsals. I didn't make the connection. Professor Morrison pulled Sarah aside. You handled that with grace. It's not easy to be corrected in front of your peers, especially by someone of that stature. Sarah shook her head. I was so confident I was right. My training was from NYU, from people who studied with Stella Adler. I thought that meant I knew. You do know, Morrison said. You know one interpretation. What Robin gave you today was another interpretation. One based on 35 years of professional application. Both can be true. The question is which serves you better long term. That night, Sarah researched the evolution of Stanislavski's technique. Robin was right. Later in his career, Stanislavski had moved away from emotional memory as a primary tool, recognizing its psychological cost. But many American acting teachers, including some in the Strasberg tradition, had continued teaching the earlier version. Sarah had been taught the earlier version. It wasn't wrong. But it wasn't the complete picture. 3 weeks later, Sarah was performing in a graduate showcase, a scene from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. High emotion, sustained intensity. She used emotional recall. Physical sensations, not relived trauma. The performance was just as powerful. But afterward, she wasn't emotionally destroyed. She could go get dinner with friends, laugh, be present. The work stayed in the work. She thought about Robin's words. Make sure your technique supports a long career. Years later, When Sarah Chen was working professionally, theater, television, occasional film, she told the story in acting workshops she taught. October 2010, I explained method acting to Robin Williams. He'd been doing it professionally since before I was born, and I told him my training was very specific so I understood better than some observer in the back row. She'd pause for effect. He could have embarrassed me. Could have made me look foolish in front of my peers and professor. Instead, he taught me the most important lesson of my training. Technique is a tool, not a religion. And the best technique is the one that lets you work for decades without destroying yourself. Sarah would then teach the distinction between emotional memory and emotional recall, exactly as Robin had explained it. And she'd always end the same way. Stay confident in your training, but stay open to refinement. Especially from someone who's lived this work long enough to know what's sustainable and what's not. The older guy in the baseball cap had been right. Sarah Chen had been conflating two techniques. And learning the difference changed her entire career. Not because her original training was wrong, but because Robin Williams showed her a more complete understanding of the work they both loved.